All right, we are live. I'm so pumped for this conversation because, you know, first off, I've become so fascinated with the emotional and energetic and psychospiritual implications for health and the manifestation of symptoms and how that impacts us. And I've really come to this perception that um, that is the fundamental. I don't know if you want to say cause for a lot of our symptoms, but I think a lot of holistic health, natural health practices completely miss the boat on that. So I'm so fascinated by biofield tuning and the, biofield anatomy and other things like German new medicine and then Veda Austin's work and how it all ties together. And then I just had a tune up with you the other day, which was incredible. I went into that session with some, pains in my body, and I left that session feeling so loose and free and playful. It was really incredible. So Eileen, thank you so much for being here and thank you for joining me. I want to ask how you're doing first. How are you doing?
Hi, Alec. Hi, everybody. I'm doing great. Yeah, I don't have any complaints. I've had a lot of sound therapy in my life.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good.
Did you do a tune up today?
I did do a tune-up today. Not on me, but anytime you give a tune-up to someone, you really also receive it. It's not like massage, you're just like, they're getting all the good juju. When you're a biofield tuning practitioner and you work with somebody, you're bathed in that coherent sound, you're bathed in that healing experience, and it works for you too. So it's a great practice to perform.
It's really beautiful because Veda Austin gave a presentation for a summit that we did with the Way Forward. And one of the things that one of the recent experiments that she did was with water out of the tap, setting it next to water from a spring that is, highly coherent, structured water. And what she found was when she did her method of freezing the water, obviously the tap water had a more coherent structure just by being in proximity to the spring water, but the spring water had even more coherence than it had prior to being next to the tap water, thus showing that or indicating that healing others, like this water, by healing another set of water, actually healed itself in the process too. So it's really cool what you're saying there, and it all ties in. I'm just like trying to tie all of these things together in my head. It's so fascinating. But I want to start by asking how you even got involved in this, because not many people are, involved in this niche subsection of health and healing.
Kind of by accident. Certainly developing, it was never on my agenda to develop a sound therapy method. It just sort of, in a way, it created itself. But I've been interested in health and human potential and science and spirituality and sort of natural science and philosophy since I was 18 years old. And when I traded in reading fiction for reading nonfiction and was seeking to heal myself, I kind of came to at the age of 18 after my first acid trip and realized how desperately broken I really was. After having this incredibly expanded, enlightening, incredible experience, and I was like, wow, I'm going to be enlightened for the rest of my life. And then the next day, kind of contracting back to the size of a pin and realizing just the fact that I was an 18-year-old girl who'd grown up in America, and I was bulimic, and I had body image issues, and I was basically kind of broken into a lot of little pieces from just difficult experiences in childhood, like I think so many of us suffer from, and we kind of compartmentalize and try to move on. But I had tried to stop being bulimic and discovered that I couldn't. It was the first time in my life that I really had this experience of my conscious mind wanting one thing, desiring to be healthy, and my subconscious behavior coming from a place that I was not connected to, and realizing that this was a pretty big problem. And obviously I'm broken inside. I'm not a whole being, and kind of went off on a quest to find all the parts and pieces that I had lost. And in the process, at one point became interested, really realizing that I was interested in natural healing and thinking maybe I wanted to go to school to be a naturopath. But I hadn't gone to college out of high school, and I hated school. And so the thought of like 12 more years of school or whatever it was going to take wasn't palatable. So I started off just doing massage therapy. And in 1996, I had a part-time massage therapy practice. And I was reading books, and Alec, you can probably relate to this. When you're a researcher, one area of interest tends to lead to the next. And
Oh
you're
my God.
following this trail of crumbs. And my
Yeah.
trail of crumbs had brought me to vibrational medicine. And I had gone out and found all the books I could on the use of color and sound and music in healing. And I was working my way through that stack of books, and I got a Gaia catalog in the mail that had a set of tuning forks for healing in it. And so I ordered it, and it came in a little tiny instruction book and said, use C in the root chakra, D in the second, E in the third, and so on up to the crown. And that was all it said. And so I started experimenting with some of my massage therapy clients. And, I really expected, like, if you take a tuning fork and it's the note of C and you activate and it's ringing, it's going to sound like a C. You're going to hold it over somebody and it's going to sound like a C.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't the case at all. I was so
Isn't that
surprised.
kind of what the book made you think, or that advertisement that you received made it seem like it would be, though?
No, I just thought that a tuning fork is going to produce an objective tone, right?
Got it.
It's
Okay.
just going to be a C.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. But what I discovered as I started to pass tuning forks over the body was that the tone would change, and it would change sometimes very dramatically depending on where I was holding it. So, for example, very early on, there was somebody who had pain in his shoulder, and I held the fork over the shoulder and it went super sharp. And over here it would sound like a C, and over here it sounded like C sharp, and it got louder and it got sharper. And he said, gosh, that's kind of how it feels, because I got sharp pain.
Wow.
And so I kept on activating it and holding it in that spot. And after just a little while, the sharpness came down out of it, and then it started to sound more harmonious. And when he got off the table, he rotated his shoulder and he was like, oh my God, all the pain is gone.
Oh my
We were both
goodness.
astonished. I mean, I didn't know what to
Was there
expect.
any sort of because I think back to my tune-up session, is there is a lot of emotional release when you were working on different parts of, like, my biofield, right? Was there any emotional release with that sharpness releasing in him in that initial session?
That's a really good question. I don't think so. Not in that particular one. I think
Okay.
that we were both so just intrigued by the fact that the tone was
Yeah.
changing. We were both in such unfamiliar territory that we were just kind of witnessing that. And
Yeah.
and both of our focus was on, like, wow, how did that change so much, right?
And for those listening, because, like, you're motioning with your hands of where you're holding over, you weren't literally, like, the fork wasn't touching his body. This is for the audio podcast listeners. It was in his field. So you've sort of developed what is called the biofield anatomy. Can you explain what the human biofield is, and then get into the specific biofield anatomy as well?
The term biofield was coined by the National Institute for Health, a panel of scientists there
Oh my
in
God.
1994, because they wanted to come up with a term, like a scientific term, for what is called the human energy field or the aura in
Well, I'm
esoteric.
glad that people think of you when they think of that, and think of your work and the work of people like you, rather than thinking of the National Institute of Health for that. So
Well, we're all working together. I mean, the scientists who are in that are all people who have been really working to advance the science of the
that's
biofield,
cool.
like Beverly Rubik, and really important figures in this movement. And it was coined to describe more of the aura is like the idea that there's a
Yeah.
field around the body, which may or may not exist, composed of electromagnetic and other putative subtle energies.
Yeah.
And and so that's a kind of working term. But in my work, what I really discovered was that the body actually has an electrical system that we're never told about. We don't even learn about this whole idea. It's one of those things where we're missing the forest for the trees, because
Mm.
most people recognize that their heart is electric.
Mhm.
If your heart goes funny, you need a pacemaker to regulate that electric pulse that's in there. Our brain waves are electric. Our blood carries a charge. Our bones are crystalline structures that make electricity when they're compressed. Even our fascia and our collagen all is a semiconductor conducting light and energy, electricity flow all through our body. So we actually have electric current running through our body when we're on, right? This is our electrical system. When you're alive, your light is on. When you die, your light goes out.
Mhm.
And what is that light? But that's your electrical system. So anything that has electric current running through it has a magnetic field around it. And that's just a basic law of science that we all know. And
Mhm.
so what I've really come to say is that the biofield isn't just the field, it's the electrical system in its entirety. It's two sides of the same coin. You can't separate the electricity in the body from the magnetic field that surrounds the body. So
Mhm.
I've kind of gone a little rogue and evolved the definition to kind of suit what I've observed in clinical practice, over decades. And it was initially when I first started doing this work with tuning forks, I was just holding them over the body, maybe 2 to 6 to 12 inches, kind of just above the body, and finding these areas where it was atonal and hanging out until it sounded more coherent. But I also made a kind of an interesting discovery. I'd find areas where it would be the tone would go loud, right? Because sometimes it would go really soft and disappear really quickly. Sometimes it would sound like it was full of static or noise, but some places would just get really loud. And I was like, okay, well, if it's gonna be loud anywhere, it should probably be loud over the energy center, midline of the body.
Mm.
And I discovered that I could actually stick the fork in these loud spots and move them like a magnet moving iron filings. I call it click, drag, and drop because it's really the same kind of motion. I'm like, click into this loud spot and then I drag it to the midline of the body. Excuse me. And then I drop it in. And then it wouldn't be loud wherever I'd been holding it, maybe over the right hip.
Wow. So what you're saying is like you would find that what should have been the midline, like right down the center channel of the body, that's where the loud spot should be. But when you would find that the loud spot was elsewhere, you were able to pull that loud spot back towards the midline using the tuning forks.
Yeah, how weird, right? I was
Yeah.
like, what is this stuff that I'm moving? And what law of physics is determining that a vibrating tuning fork can move it? Like, I was so puzzled. I was like,
Uh-huh.
what is this? That was before I got that there was an electrical system. And I did not also understand that magnetic fields guide electric currents. So
Mm.
by shifting the magnetic field, I was actually moving the way electricity was moving in the body.
Wow.
But I didn't know that at the time.
And
It's
and
just
w
all
w was
invisible.
it with these loud spots, sorry to interrupt, I just wanna get this one out too. With these loud spots, and they typically corresponded to some physical pain or ailment or something that that individual was feeling, and then when you moved that through the click, drag, and drop method back to the midline, you were able to sort of resolve those physical ailments that they were experiencing.
Yes,
Wow.
exactly.
Wow,
And
wow,
and
wow.
if you think about it, like, pain in many cases is too much voltage, too much current running through a wire, like an overloaded wire.
Mhm.
And very often, it was emotional. So, for example, if I'm working with somebody who has all this pain in their left shoulder, what creates that loud spot is the fact that they are mentally and emotionally feeding the emotion of sadness
Mm.
and maybe not expressing it. So that's when the whole sort of biofield anatomy began to emerge, actually through left shoulder, because I started to notice like everybody who comes in as left shoulder pain has sadness there. And it
Mhm.
sounds sad. Like, this is the other kind of weird thing about the tuning fork is that just like music evokes emotion, right? And
Mhm.
seeks to approximate and evoke emotion. Like, Alec, if you and I are sitting and listening to a sad song, I don't have to say to you, Alec, this song is sad. Because
Yeah.
it's like, duh, Eileen, like I can hear it and feel it, right? I'm resonating sadness. And it was the same way. Like the tuning fork, the tone would change and it would evoke sadness. And then there were many different iterations of sadness that I could come across, like loneliness or abandonment or like a deep grief or keening or wailing, right? There's a whole spectrum of different ways we can feel sad, and it would be reflected in the fork.
Wow.
And so I started to be like, "Hmm, that seems like wherever time we feel sad, that's where it goes."
Mhm.
Um, and then I made a discovery really that changed everything, and that really led to this in-depth exploration of and understanding of the biofield anatomy. Because for 10 years, Alec, I just worked over the body, and I just did this part-time because I really wasn't interested in being a healer, certainly not a tuning fork energy healer.
Yeah.
You know, like the whole like look and feel of that was kind of not my scene, you know?
Seemed a little bit woo-woo for you at the
Yeah,
time.
just a little
Yeah.
too woo for me. You know, I'm just not that kind of person. I'm very practical. I'm very grounded. I'm very logical. Like people seeing me as some kind of airy fairy out there chick was not what I wanted. But at the same time, it was intriguing, you know, and I'm a natural scientist and I, you know, follow my curiosity.
Mhm.
And so I had a moment in 2006 where I accidentally discovered a loud spot about 2.5 feet off of somebody's body. Just completely random accident, kind of ended up floating a tuning fork through there. I'm like, whoa, that's a loud spot. What's going on there? And so I'm standing there investigating this loud spot, trying to like, well, what do I do with this? And then I realized that like, well, everything just goes to the midline. So I'm just gonna like click and drag and drop it into the midline. And so I did. And this person had all this pain and pulling in her jaw and her neck and down her shoulder. And she'd been to chiropractors and acupuncturists, massage therapists. Nobody had been able to resolve it. And she heard about me. And so she called me the next morning and she said, Eileen, all of that pain and pulling, it's gone.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, how interesting. So the next people who came in, I started 6 feet away. I've, 7 feet away. And I started combing in and I made so many discoveries, Alec. I was like, oh my God, there's like this whole tonal and textural unseen world here hidden in plain view. And the tuning forks kind of reveal it like an invisible ink decoder. Suddenly I'm like, wow, there's all this stuff here. And I found walls and channels and rivers and eddies and like all kinds of stuff. And so it took years. It really did. I mean, it took maybe 3 years of exploring and having these, it was sort of like a blind fumble in the dark,
Mhm.
teaching myself this sort of sonic braille language with these momentary flashes of illumination where, pattern recognition would come in and
Mhm.
I'd be like, oh, that's that. And that's that. And, I discovered that everybody who came in whose right hip hurt was thinking about the future and all the things they had to do. They had a busy mind and a busy body, and they're piling up magnetic energy in the field there and pulling electricity and like,
I'm
oh,
laughing because I historically have right hip pain, so
yeah, right. And
that
then you
sounds exactly right.
probably relate, right?
Mm,
And in those moments where your hip starts twinging, you got to check your thoughts. Like,
mhm.
what am I doing? I'm like, wait, I'm doing this, right? I'm going off and I'm grinding in the yang side of my mind. And most people do, actually. It's a very ubiquitous imbalance that
Mm.
most of our fields are pitched yang into overdoing, into future orientation, into guilt-driven tasking and things like that. And so, eventually the whole picture came into view, and that's the biofield anatomy map that my students work with now.
How much of that was, what you were observing through seeing these patients or clients, and how much of that was you sort of feeling into your intuitive pull for identifying specific pieces of the biofield anatomy?
That's a good question. So, in my book, I talk about this idea of having a mail slot, MAIL slot, like that's in a door,
Mhm.
like dink, and the mail comes in. And I sort of had this really interesting phenomenon, and it was really there from the beginning, but especially when I started exploring the field. Like it really kicked in when I was exploring the field, where I would be combing through the field and I'd hit an area of restriction. And it's such a weird thing. You're moving a tuning fork through empty
Mhm.
space, and all of a sudden you're like, oh,
Yeah, that's
I'm
so
stuck.
weird. Like a
Like
physical boundary is there or something,
yeah,
like you're actually hitting something.
like you're actually hitting it. Feels like stuff. It's
Yeah.
like there's something there. And this is a universal experience. People who are learning to use the forks. And if you just quiet your mind and remove self-doubt and just come into curiosity, all of a sudden you'll hit these places. And whenever I hit these places, my mail slot would open and a little note would drop in and it would say something like sadness, age 14. And so I would say to the
Wow.
person, I'd be like, did something really sad happen when you were 14? And they're like, oh, that's my grandmother died. We were so close and nobody ever wanted to talk about it. And no, 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 yeah. So I don't know where that information came from, but there was something beyond my conscious mind and my own experience that knew what these things were. And so in the beginning, it really was intuition. But then it evolved because it was all so predictable. I'm like, oh yeah, that zone is sadness, and that part, because I also figured out that in addition to the biofield being sort of compartmentalized and like different memories get laid down in different areas. This is a torus, which you can relate to.
Yeah,
And
literally one right behind me.
right. And it holds our memories. So we're told that they're in the brain. But what I found was more like something like vibrational information magnetically encoded in standing waves. And so as we go about our experience in our body's electrical system, right, everything that you see and smell and touch and taste and feel and experience is all an electrical signal. So it makes sense that our memories are stored in our electrical system. And, I hypothesize in this very specific way. And as we generate that information, it moves away from us, kind of like when your hair grows, it moves away from you.
Got it.
So the biofield anatomy is timelined, meaning that information I find close to the body is recently generated, and information I find at the very outer edge of the field and the membrane that creates the boundary of our own personal bubble. Inside that boundary is the record of our gestation. Just inside that is birth. So it's sort of like dropping a needle on an album and reading the vibrational record of someone's life. And you can hear when you hit the highs and the lows and the gaps and the static and like all of, that's your life story that we're reading. And so the tuning fork is diagnostic, meaning that it will find these difficult memories, but it's also therapeutic because of the principles of resonance and entrainment. So the tuning fork will initially resonate with that distortion that's present. And that's how I diagnose what's going on or understand it. But then a strong coherent signal will overtake and entrain a weak incoherent signal. So the tuning fork just hanging out there being coherent with the body uses that mirror, that reflection, that metronome to tune itself, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, what's so cool about that, not to continue to touch on like Melissa Sell's work in Germany medicine and then Veda Austin's work, but Veda did a series of experiments with eggs where she had a free range egg, which I would imagine is a more coherent, strong signal, and surrounded that one free range egg with 9 caged eggs. And those 9 caged eggs now had a more coherent structure when she cracked the eggs open and froze the albumin. And the free range egg was unimpacted. And that goes like perfectly in line with what you're saying here.
Yeah, that's resonance and entrainment. That healthy, coherent, strong signal entrained all the other mildly incoherent ones. And they're like remembered their own coherent eggness, basically.
Their eggness. So how did you discover that? And maybe it wasn't you that discovered this, but how did they go about discovering that the biofield of the human body is a 6-foot radius? And correct me if I'm wrong. It's a 6-foot radius, right?
Well, it's not. It's important that we don't get blocky in something that's, fire, essentially.
Yeah. Okay.
And so on average, what I found in my treatment room was that I was hitting that membrane about 6 feet away on most people.
Got it.
But our fields are very dynamic and everyone is different. One of the things that I learned to do was douse and use dowsing rods to find the edge of the field. And you can do an experiment where you walk towards somebody with dowsing rods. You're like, okay, show me the edge, and they'll swing open. And then you come back with a tuning fork. You're going to find it in the same spot. You're going to find that resistance where there's more electric charge. And just like in the skin of a fruit, right? There's more life. Same with the boundary of the field. There's more electric charge, just like a cell membrane or a water bubble. It's like that boundary has charge, right? So I remember doing this on my husband, and he was outside, and I'm walking towards him with the dowsing rods, and they kept showing me back up, back up, back up. And so I'm like 30 feet away from him. On this thing open, and he's like, yeah.
Is your husband the type of the guy that when he walks in the room, like everyone can feel his energy immediately?
Yeah.
Okay,
And he's
well, then that
definitely
makes
got
sense.
a kind of unique energy. And he's also very centered in body. He's been riding dirt bikes since he was 5, very aggressively, right? Which really puts you very much in, it's a very athletic sport. So it really puts you in the core of your being. And he's also a person of deep integrity, right? So he's strong, he's in integrity, and he has a great spirit. And so, in that moment outside, his field was registering as 30 feet. Whereas if somebody's really sick and tired, I might get like up to 2 feet. and then hit that edge. So we're fluctuating. You might be standing in a telluric current, or also known as a dragon line or an earth energy line, where there's additional electric charge running through, and that informs you and makes your field bigger. We've done experiments with that. Like, what happens when you're standing in a dragon line? What happens when you're standing in the double layer membrane of a dragon line? Because these are flows of electromagnetic current. I believe they're the same thing that science calls a telluric current.
Mm.
And so your field actually gets 3 times bigger when you're in the membrane of a telluric current. So, it's so fluctuating, but on average, they tend to settle in around 6 feet.
I just had a thought, and correct me if I'm wrong on this line of thinking. When we're in when our body's in coherence and we have so much energy, vitality, chi really flowing through our body, right? Doesn't it make sense that, like, talking about how that our field will expand out? Maybe it's because so much energy is bursting out of us that then we can sort of give off that energy to other people. Whereas when we're sick and feeling bad, or feeling, in a poor state of health, we're wanting to keep that energy in close to us, which is why our field sort of shrinks. Have you thought about that
Yeah,
before?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely it. The healthier and stronger and more vital you are, the bigger your field is going to be. And we all can tell. You can tell when somebody walks in a room, you're like, whoa, they got a big
Yeah.
field, right? They've got a lot of vitality. You feel it.
And that's so cool too, thinking about bioresonance, which I want to get into in a little bit. How you can literally heal other people with your presence. I was talking with Amanda Vollmer the other day, and she mentioned how she went to, I think she went to India, and she sat with uh, a yogi, and just by being in the presence of that yogi, she was able to feel more clear in her channel, and other people felt the same way. So it's like maybe that yogi's field was so massive, so expansive, that just by being in the presence of it, it helped bring you into coherence as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we experience this all the time in micro ways, in micro encounters with other people. People either make you feel good because they feel good,
Mhm.
or they make you feel bad because they feel bad. Even when you're at an event and you're watching a speaker, that person is going to, just through the sound of their own voice and the fact that you're putting attention on them, they're going to entrain you into their state. Which is why I feel like people like us, who people listen to, it's really important that we think of ourselves as a tuning fork, that we mind our own coherence, because simply by our voice or our presence, we are informing them. Like, the strong coherent signal will overtake the weak incoherent signal. The guru was being the free range egg.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned the other day, I don't want to name names, but you mentioned you went to a conference one time, and that individual who was speaking was very tired, and he's supposed to be this more spiritually inclined healer. And you're like, how irresponsible almost of him to step on stage in that state and then project his voice outward, because that is putting out a distorted signal to other people, essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's clear this person was super exhausted, running on adrenaline, and I'm so sensitive and so aware of my own body. Like, my adrenals are fluttering, my mid back was hurting, I was yawning. I was like, "Oh God, he's torturing me by broadcasting his own state."
So
Yeah.
that's where you're able to see past the words that people are saying and really feel into the energy behind the words. And that's like incredible. And I think all of us have that ability. We just don't realize it. So now I want to get into the specifics, as much as we can cover, around the biofield anatomy and what we can look for in different parts of our field.
Yeah.
I'll let you start there. So, like, with the head, like on the left side. So the left side is more of related to things dealing with that individual's father, and then the right is the mother, correct?
No, it's the other way
The
around.
other way
So
around. Okay.
our left side of our body in my observation, is more yin, is more feminine, and actually where I find information directly related to your mother's ancestral lineage and your mother. So in the biofield anatomy, there are these features called ancestral rivers that are streams of information, and it's maybe an inch and a quarter wide, that run down either side of the body about 10 inches off the shoulder or so. And when you're going along in the field and all of a sudden you hit the ancestral river, you feel like you've hit something that is, got a structure like this. And it always sounds very different, because when you're out here, you're like reading their life, it's all about them. And all of a sudden you hit this river and it's got like, whoa, all this ancestral information. It's got a very different tonal quality and textural quality. Wow. And in the solar plexus, on either side of the solar plexus, there are actually these fixed points that are about the size of a hockey puck. And they hang out on either side of your solar plexus, sitting in the ancestral river, so like 10 inches out. The left side is your mom. And if I stick a fork in that spot, I can tell you all about your mom. And if I investigate...
You literally did that with both of my parents the other day, and it was nuts because it was so spot on. It was crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah, that information is there, and it's all tonally encoded. And it's all in this vibrational language, but I've had the liberty of decoding this language, over 26 years now of listening to it. There's a whole language there.
Do you tell people that you speak more than, do you speak any other actual verbal languages aside from English?
No, just vibration.
Do you tell people that you're bilingual? Do you say I speak more than English?
I should, because it really is a fascinating language. And it's a language that everybody who comes to tuning learns in time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people hear me and they're like, oh, Eileen's like this, that, and they think that they ought to know that. But I've been speaking this language for a long time. Mm-hmm. But everybody learns it, because you'll hear, one day you'll be working and you'll hear, ah, and you're like, oh my God, that's alarm, right? Mm-hmm. I know that's alarm. Or you'll hear, and you're like, oh my God, that's fear. Or you'll hear, and you're like, oh, that's melancholy. And once you learn to identify different ones, and then you get good and you're like, oh, that's the sound of somebody who peed their pants in first grade at their desk, because
you literally did that with me the other day. Not peeing my pants specifically, but you're naming specific things at certain childhood traumatic experiences that I had at certain ages, and it was so spot on. And you were doing it over Zoom, which is a whole nother thing I want to get into in a minute, but I want to continue on this biofield anatomy thing first.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there's such a whole spectrum of that. I mean, basically, like, your whole life is encoded in this vibrational information, right? And it is all very specific, and it's the same from person to person, which is what enabled me to figure out the biofield anatomy. So yeah, you've got these mom and dad spots, and then in the space between the mom spot and the body, I can read the quality of the relationship between the two of you, because it's all right there in that spot. So the ancestral rivers, the mom and dad spots, and then there's this sort of like compartmentalization, or almost like file drawers of whenever we indulge a certain mental state, they're almost like what I call mind frames. Whenever you're in this frame of mind, this is where you're energizing your field. So, I mean, we can just kind of go down the body. The crown is really interesting, because the crown doesn't register emotion so much. It's sort of like beyond duality, truly. So we don't have like the imbalance on the right or the left side of the crown. What I find in the crown is things like head injuries, times when we are under pressure, time pressure, or money pressure, or under someone's thumb. But no emotions are stored up there. Okay. And the head, so remember, the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. Mm-hmm. The left side of the body is more yin, it's more inward. The right side is more yang, it's more outward. So the right side of the brain is about looking backwards. Anytime we're like memories, or when we spend time like lying in bed at night beating ourselves up because we shouldn't have done this and we shouldn't have done that and we should have said this. If anybody does that, that's a really bad habit. It's not good for your health. And you're going to start accumulating stuff over here. Whereas this side, the left side, is yang. It connects to the right side of the body. And so this is where, when we're spinning, I got to do this, I got to do that, right? And that connects down into the hip, the right hip, of like, I call it hamster wheels. We have a hamster, male hamster here, and he's running forward. I got to do this, I got to do that, and da, 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 da. This female hamster is going backwards, being like, I shouldn't have done this, and I shouldn't have done that, kind of thing. And both of these things take us out of now. Right? So this is really like the midline of the body is like now. And that's what sound healing is all about. Is like, can you come into the center of your own being and be present and alert and curious in this moment? Mm-hmm. right? Because so much of what ails us is past, is future, is, but
Oh my goodness, yes.
yeah. So the throat, we pile up energy on the left side when the impulse to express arises and we suppress it.
Mm.
So we might want to cry, or we might want to tell someone we love them, or we might want to tell someone we hate them, or whatever it is. And we're like, right? So this is where stuff accumulates when we suppress expression. Whereas the right side energy piles up over here when we're fighting, when we're arguing, when we're not being heard, when we were like finally decide to express something, we've stuffed and stuffed and stuffed, and then we finally blow and we get pushback because it's not cool to
Mhm.
blow on somebody, right? So you end up in that. And then you don't have anything coming through the center. And then you like wonder why your thyroid is
Wow.
low because you're not energizing from here in this moment effectively and engaging in what I call successful diplomacy. The shoulders, the left shoulder is definitely sadness. There was a time that I remember I was doing these poolside 15-minute sessions at this spa that I was working at, and this older woman came and sat in my chair, and she said, "Oh, my left shoulder hurts so much, and I've had MRIs, and I've had this, and then they tell me there's nothing wrong with it." She's like, "I'm in so much pain." And so I go in and I'm investigating, and there's this huge pile of energy like stuck just off the left shoulder. And I said, "Have you lost someone really dear to you in the last year or two?" And she said, "Yeah, my husband died 18 months ago, and I haven't
Oh my
been able to
goodness.
let go of the sadness. It was weighing on her."
Mhm.
Right? So there was this is psychosomatic pain, Alec.
Yeah.
It's not all in her head, it's all in her field, and it's real.
Yeah.
Even though
Yeah.
there's nothing physically wrong. And so I just stuck a fork in it and did click, drag, and drop, put it back in the middle. And in just a 15-minute session in a chair, she was just like, "Oh my
Wow.
God, it feels completely better. It feels completely better." And then I noticed her, watching me, that she was just like kind of stunned and amazed and
Yeah.
grateful. Afterwards, she was like, "I can't believe she just fixed my shoulder in 15 minutes."
Especially for someone who probably, you would assume has never been exposed to something like that before. They're like, "What the heck is this witchcraft that just happened to me?" But I
Yeah,
feel
I
better.
mean,
Okay, that's cool.
it seems kind of far out, if you don't
Yeah.
get the little simple underlying science behind it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the right shoulder gets painful, or maybe gets an injury when you are saying yes when you mean no, when you
Mm,
are being an accommodator, an overgiver, a caretaker, and especially when you start to become resentful about
mm.
that. Right? It's really easy to be over caregiving and then blame the person. It's like your
Yeah.
fault, but it isn't, because you are the one that's saying
You
yes.
were saying, yeah, you weren't setting boundaries appropriately, so it was technically you.
Yeah, exactly, which isn't always easy to it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to do that, than to
Yep.
realize it's
Yep.
this.
Yep.
Um, and then, in the solar plexus, the right side, relates to the liver, our relationship with our father, and, the emotion of anger.
Mm,
And that ties in with Chinese medicine, which also sees the liver related to the father and to anger. But I didn't know that at the time. I was just my own observation, which I realized correlated with Chinese medicine.
wow.
The left side of the solar plexus, this was one was interesting because it took me a while to figure out the best word for it.
Mm,
Right. So if you think about, like, all of these are the wrong expressions of the balance, which is in the middle, right? In the heart, it's just like, love yourself, love others. Should be pretty easy, right? The solar plexus is really about our own sense of personal empowerment and how we interact with other people's wills, right? Our will, other people's wills. And so, the yang imbalance of that is we get angry and, but so what's the yin imbalance of that? And I got insight into it one day and I was like, what's the present tense of regret?
mm,
Right? Kind of an interesting thing. Like, what's going on in that moment
yeah.
that you regret later?
Is it,
And
can I guess?
yeah, you can guess.
Is it like guilt or what would it be?
It's powerlessness.
Powerlessness. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
like in that moment, I was powerless to respond. I was powerless to say no to the chocolate chip cookie. I was, like
Got it.
whatever it is, like you're just powerless. You're kind of helpless. Like, and I suffered from pain just off the left side of my solar plexus, kind of the pancreatic kind of area, for a long time. But I also had a lot of mental habits of contracting myself into feeling like a frustrated and powerless victim, which a
Mm,
lot of us do without even
yeah.
realizing it. We adopt the posture of victimhood and we tell
Mm.
ourselves victim stories and we create perpetrators. And, this is just one of the many dramas going on in the human family matrix that we end up individuating into ourselves.
Wow.
But they're just patterns of, and how we're energizing our body and field.
Mm,
Uh, so and also the spleen is the organ, really the spleen and pancreas relate to mother, our relationship with our mother, our relationship with the feeling of sweetness. Can we be sweet with ourselves? Can we take good care of ourselves? Can we nourish ourselves? And so that's the solar plexus. Then we come down to the hips. So as I already said, the right hip is this sort of guilt-driven overdoing. Gotta go, gotta do, gotta give my money to the man
mhm,
kind of thing. Whereas the left hip is more about frustrated non-doing, the things that we want to be doing or being or having, but we're not. We're over caretaking everybody else. And we see these as body workers. We often see these correlations between the shoulder and the hip. So the left hip often is put out when the right shoulder is put out, because you're so busy taking care of everybody else that your own needs aren't getting met. Right. Whereas if we stayed really busy, if our mental body is busy and our physical body is busy, that overrides the emotional body. So we don't have to feel our sadness as long as we keep our mind and our body engaged. Right. So
mm,
very often when people stop, that feeling of sadness might catch up with you and wash over you. And then you're like, oh, better go get busy again, or we
mhm,
do something that is like try to think our emotions instead of simply letting us feel our emotions. And
mhm,
we've all been taught that our emotions are kind of suspect, right? So there's a whole lot of effort goes into suppressing our emotions. And a lot
yeah.
of tension in the body is trying to hold back emotions that we couldn't digest in childhood, or that we, for whatever reason think is bad or wrong. There's certain emotions that are really uncomfortable to feel. Sometimes it's a lot easier to project them or to displace them. Now, kind of interestingly, there are also half steps. I spent years just like working the sort of major ones, and then I added the feet, and then I added the knees. And after a while with that, I was like, well, what's going on in the shins and what's going on in the thighs? What's
Mhm.
going on in the space between the notes? And I started exploring that. And that's a whole other conversation. You start to go in depth in what's in these half steps.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's the intricacy can go on. Never mind what's in the territory beyond, right? Because there's that too. Um, but the 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 root, when it's balanced, right? The root and sacral center um, have to do with just being here now, right? Not overdoing, not underdoing, attending to your own needs, knowing your own needs. Certainly, the sacral center, when it's centered and it's not being pulled to the side by guilt or shame on the right, or frustration or disappointment on the left, is about creativity and sensuality, self-worth, and our ability to receive and to give, intimacy, pleasure, money, like all that stuff that people kind of have a hard time around, right? Everybody thinks they want to be rich and sexy and all that, but most people are caught up in guilt and shame, frustration, disappointment. And
Yeah.
if you're not in that, then you tend to go to blame.
Mhm,
So the half step between the second chakra on the right side, guilt and shame, and then anger, is like self-righteousness and blame.
wow.
And so if you don't want to feel the shame that's going on down below, because it sucks to feel shame, then your defense of that is going to be to point fingers, to blame, to be self-righteous.
It's so crazy because my wife and I have talked about that quite a bit. A lot of um, people that are in the health, freedom, sovereignty space, whatever, that are just constantly looking outward and blaming other people. Her and I have talked about they probably have something inside of them that they need to look at, and they probably have some undealt with shame. that they're
That's
dealing with.
exactly what it is. It's
Yeah.
undealt with shame. Yeah, because it's so uncomfortable. The other emotion that I discovered that is really hard for people to hear, to feel, and to admit that they feel is hate.
Mm.
Because we've all been so programmed. I mean, certainly as little girls, and it's probably the same for boys. Like you say the word hate, like I hate that, and people are like, oh, like that's a very bad word. That's a very strong word. Like we're just not allowed to
So
express hate.
suppressing the hate that you're authentically feeling.
Yeah, and it's
Mm.
a valid emotion. Like when you're hurt and you're angry and you're powerless to do anything about it, and maybe even afraid, like you're gonna hate.
Mm.
And that's okay. And so, unfortunately, what ends up happening is that instead of us being real about hating things, the only safe place very often to direct it is at self.
Mm.
So you end up with this sort of epidemic of self-loathing that shows
Mm.
up in all kinds of ways, and it can be, I hate my thighs, I hate my bank account, I hate my job, whatever, but that's all self-hate because that's the only place it's safe to hate. Or to like a public figure like Donald Trump. Oh, like, okay, there's something we can hate, right? It's okay to hate Donald Trump.
Mm.
Right? Even all those people are trying to be good and don't want to hate. We're like, oh, I'm gonna hate him, or I'm gonna
Mm.
hate this. You know what I mean? Or they're like, why don't you just be real?
Yeah.
Um, about it, that it's okay to feel it, and you don't need to like take people you don't even know that you've been manipulated to hate. You know what I mean? And, like it stops you
Yeah.
from hating. I hate for-profit prisons, and there's so many things that I hate. I hate needless suffering in the world. That's
Mm.
why I'm so motivated to want to help relieve it. It's okay that I hate needless suffering. I'm not
Mm.
even going to try to put a different word on it. I hate it. I hate seeing people suffer when they don't need to. Right? And that's going to motivate me towards effective action.
And it's more about the underlying. I mean, I'd guess that it's more about the underlying feeling associated with the word hate, and hate is the best descriptive word to describe that feeling. So when you are suppressing that word, you're also suppressing the feeling and emotion associated with it.
Yeah, and you know where it goes when we suppress that emotion? It goes to the surface of the heart. And
Mm.
it kind of sits on the heart like a film, and then it hardens. So when we talk about how
Hardens the
somebody's like
heart. Wow.
black-hearted or hard-hearted, right?
Yeah.
That's all that hate has just kind of, and it literally, like when I've worked with people who have harbored hate towards themselves, towards others that they haven't been at liberty to express or heal or whatever, like their heart is stiff.
Mm.
And so much of like heart health is emotional. It's not from eating steak and bacon and eggs. It's from being like
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah. 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 So I think we've finished up almost every piece of the. Wait, we still need to have. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Two more.
Yeah, we
Okay.
still have to do knees. So I want to get down to knees and feet. So for years, when I got my little instruction book, it just was like the 7 major chakras. And so I would end at people's crowns and they get up to the table and they'd be like, ooh, I'm kind of lightheaded. And so I decided maybe I better go down and like work on their feet. Right.
Mm.
So I started working on feet, but there was so much information in the feet that I was really confused. Like I was like,
Mm.
I don't know what's going on in the feet because there's so much going on in the feet. I can't even tell what's going on in the feet.
And so
It
you're
kind of
getting a lot of distortions on the tuning forks, like in different areas on the feet. And you're
in
like,
all kinds of ways, you know what I mean? Like
got
all
it.
kinds of things would show up. So it took me a long time to kind of boil down the feet. But just like in Chinese medicine, right? In reflexology, the whole body is in the foot. And so
Mm.
that's kind of the way it is in biofield tuning. Like the whole body is in the foot. The whole, if I'm working on your feet, anything might show up.
Wow.
But ultimately, I really came to see that the left foot is really about being stuck or mired in a toxic situation. So people who end up with left foot, left ankle injuries, almost always, I'm like, were you stuck in something kind of toxic when that injury happened? Like, were you feeling trapped? And they're always like, mm-hmm. Whereas the right one tends to be like when we're uncertain as far as injuries go, right? Like if you're like, do I step this way or that way? When you dither, when you're uncertain, though you create kind of like a whole kind of cloud of uncertainty around that right foot, and then
Can I
injury.
share something real quick? I broke my right ankle in 8th grade, and literally uncertainty is how it happened because I was running after a dude who had just stolen the ball. I was playing basketball, and he pump faked, and I jumped up to block him, uncertain of whether he was going to shoot or not, and then landed on his foot and broke my ankle.
right?
Literally uncertainty is what
You were,
under.
oh yeah, you were holding that energy of
Yeah.
uncertainty, and that weakened the field
Yeah.
of your right foot. I mean, it's kind of weird,
Wow.
how it happens. Injuries that we get in things like car accidents or motorcycle accidents or skiing accidents or hiking accidents, they're not random. They happen where the field is weakest. Where the field is weakest, where you have the most imbalance in your electromagnetic field. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And the knees were the last thing that I came to, right? Because I did the feet and then I, did the 7 chakras. When I finally got to the knees and I started exploring them, I was mortified. I was like, oh my God, the knees are so relate to being stuck. And this is what so many people would come to me because they're stuck in some way, right? Why do you go
Mhm.
looking for help? Because you got a problem you can't solve yourself. And I discovered that the knees were so related. The left knee related to like, what do you need to let go of? What job that doesn't serve you, living situation, relationship, habit, story are you holding on to that maybe you need to let go, right? A lot of people do the thing and regarding attachment and release, trust, and that sort of thing. So people tend to get left knee injuries when they're kind of stuck to the devil they know, even though they know they need to let it go, kind of thing. Whereas the right knee is more about being blocked moving forward. So are you blocking yourself? Are you self-sabotaging? Did the fact that your
Mm.
mother had a stroke and you had to take care of her all this time and now you can't go live in Italy like you want to, or whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
Is that will show up in the right knee. So, these are just kind of a universal that pattern that I've observed.
Have you, aside from the biofield anatomy, when it comes to, let's say, something like respiratory symptoms of illness or anything like that, have you uh, found any emotion that corresponds or correlates with anything like that, or like sinus issues, even specific as like a certain type of, digestive issue? Have you
Yeah.
have you okay.
Yeah, all of them. I mean, I can listen to your body not only to diagnose emotional imbalances, but physical issues like, because my mind kind of becomes like an ultrasound machine screening, and that
Wow.
because the sound has that information in it. So I
Mm.
can be like, okay, your third, cervical vertebrae is rotated 45
What
degrees,
the
or
heck?
the spleen,
Wow.
the juncture between your spleen and pancreas is all gummed up, or you have fatty liver, or you have arthritis in this joint. Like every pathology, just like anything that goes wrong with your car, is going to make a kind of particular sound, right? If you're a good
Wow.
mechanic and you get into my car that's going thunka thunka thunka, I don't know what the heck it is, but you're like, I know that sound. That's your left CB boot thunking,
Wow.
right? Because they
Yeah.
know the sound that it makes. So it's the same with the body. Every pathology makes a sound, and so I'm able to listen to determine or reflect that back to the body. And what's cool, Alec, and you and I discovered this when I worked on you, is like for me as a practitioner and for you as a receiver, we don't have to intend anything. We don't have to try
Mhm.
anything. All we have to do is listen and let the body listen to itself and let the body fix itself to whatever
Surrender.
degree it can in that moment. The
Mhm.
body's organizing intelligence works with that reflection and that coherent input to bring itself into tune. We're self-tuning instruments.
Wow. Yeah. So with respiratory symptoms specifically, just like thinking back to these last 2.5 years, is it individual, and you're just sort of able to tune into that with the tuning forks and get to an individual, um, like cause is probably the best word to describe that, or is it there's a pattern with respiratory symptoms and something going on with that individual specifically, or like across the board?
Well, it can be caused by different things, right? I mean,
Mhm.
just like in German new medicine, very often there's some kind of trauma. There's
Yeah.
some kind of physical trauma or emotional trauma, and then the symptom appears after that. And
Mhm.
so we'll find the record in the field of like, when did this start? Oh, it
Got it.
started here. And what happened here? Well, I fell down the stairs and hit my head. Oh, and
Mhm.
I've had asthma. We've had asthma ever since then, right?
Mhm.
So in this case was the cause of the asthma was the fact that this person was pushed down the stairs by an older sibling, wasn't expecting it, right? And
Mhm.
hit their head. But now they can't, now that their brother has broken their trust, they're like, and there's something physical. And so the body responds with a symptom. So it's going to be different for different people based on what the input was. But very often, like the lungs and breathing do relate to grief,
Mhm.
and damage in the ability to love and to be loved and to feel safe in
Mm.
that experience.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because I look at, I've cited this study probably 1,000 times, and people are probably, annoyed at this point, but it's so significant to me. The CDC published a study in July of 2021, and if we're supposed to be, trusting the CDC, the second strongest risk factor for death associated with COVID was fear/anxiety related disorders. And
Yeah.
then, from my understanding, symptoms of hypoxia as it relates to German new medicine are correlated to like perpetual fear of death. So it's just fascinating how all that, yeah, right. Yeah. How all that ties in. It's
Yeah.
pretty fascinating to me.
I mean,
So
it ends up really being more fear of life, really, than death,
yeah.
right? Because breath is life. It's through our breathing. And this is kind of an interesting thing when you to kind of think about the electrical system and what we run on, right?
Mhm.
Because you can go for weeks without food. Some people go longer. Some people claim they don't eat. You can go for days without liquids. But you can only go a few minutes without breath.
Yeah.
And the oxygen, so we've been really indoctrinated in this world of solid, liquid, and gas, molecular reductionism. It's all just stuff and there's nothing else kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh, and so when we think about oxygen, we think of it as a gas, but the oxygen molecule has free electrons. And so when you breathe in, those electrons then there's people who say there's no such thing as electron, but let's just call it
Mhm.
electric charge, right?
Yeah.
Life force, will bind to the hemoglobin in your blood. That's what turns blood bright red as opposed
Mhm.
to dark red, is because it's filled with light. It's got electric charge in it, and that's what's getting dropped off at your cells. Your cells need a certain amount of electric charge across the cell membrane in order to carry out all their cellular functions. Your body needs electricity to run, and the bulk of that is coming through your breath. And
Mhm.
so if you are afraid, if you are in a state of contraction, what happens to your breathing?
Mhm.
Right? It practically stops.
Yeah.
so so you're not getting enough electric juice into your system to run properly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think about that when I've been in periods of anxiety or fear. I notice that my breathing is more like naturally without even knowing. And then I tap in and realize what I'm doing. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm breathing really quickly and I'm not taking deep conscious breaths. I'm not present because I'm being pulled into the past or to the future surrounding something. So it's just crazy how it all relates. I want to get into now the I'm trying to think of a way to frame this. How hard is it to resolve those energetic attachments? And what I mean by that is when I have a traumatic memory in my field, what mechanism causes that distortion to resurface again after it's been dealt with through biofield tuning? Like what is it the human psyche that pulls that person back into that state of feeling in dis-ease?
I think that it's just the tendency of energy to flow along established pathways.
Got it.
We get wired blindly early on. We have our trauma responses, our stress responses to our environment, even coming as early as our birth experience or even in utero. And then that becomes our stress response. And we just tend to just flow along established pathways. So in tuning, what we do is we come in and we kind of break up that pattern, and we don't get rid of anything. Obviously,
Mhm.
life impresses you indelibly in a certain level. And so we can't get rid of anything, but we can help the body to digest and integrate, take out the highs and the lows and kind of settle it down so that there's not so much energy running through there. And then we're kind of like, okay, we'll settle this down and we're going to guide it to the middle and like teach your body. It's kind of like a chiropractic adjustment,
Mhm.
right?
Got
So
it.
you go to chiropractor for a course of chiropractic. You don't go for one chiropractic session and then you're in alignment for the rest of your life. I
Yeah.
mean, that's pretty
Yeah.
rare,
Yeah.
right? Because what if you're under stress, if you hit a pothole, you're like, oh damn, there's that shoulder back again, right? You got to go back to the chiropractor
Well, I
and go,
think right before this session, you answered that question for me, though, because we were talking about my session specifically, because a lot of mine dealt with being the caretaker for my mom growing up through a lot of the traumatic experiences with my mom. And then right after we left that session and I was feeling free and clear, a couple hours later, my daughter fell off of our bed from 3 feet up and hit her head. And I was back in that tense state, having to care for a woman in my life. And of course, I'm going to care for my daughter. But the point is that pattern resurfaced in reality to then re-trigger some of those symptoms. But, and this is a big but, they didn't, those physical symptoms that I was experiencing prior to the tuning session weren't as established after having done the tuning session and really being focused on consciously breathing and being in the present moment.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So so things can come back, right? You have a stressor, you have a pressure. A lot of times when we're under pressure, time pressure, money pressure, that's when, I say we come out sideways or we blow a stress gasket. And all of a sudden you're like in that pattern that, you'd done some work around and thought maybe you'd resolved, but pressure or stress, it will fire those back up again. But the more tuned you become, the quicker you get out of those, or maybe you learn to not even go there at all. So, we're going to encounter stressors and we're going to, when the more pressure we're under, the more difficult stuff is going to come out. We can't erase that completely. It's the pathways, the ghosts of those pathways are there. But that said, I mean, sometimes in sessions, I do resolve stuff with people and it never comes back.
Wow.
After one, I was like, oh, here's this birth trauma or here's this thing. And, that settles down and it never has charge again. And we never go there again. But, if you have, let's just say that you have a really strong inner critic that's always giving you a hard time and generating guilt and low self-worth. Now, I can come in and I can do an adjustment on that area, right? And you're like, oh, here's your inner critic really digging in this hip. And you're like, yeah, and I've got Crohn's disease and because I'm eating myself alive with my mind. And okay, so I can adjust that. But can I stay inside your head and stop you from going there? No, right? So a
Only you
big
can.
part of this work is like training you to be more mindful with your own mind. You got to learn to keep yourself in balance because I can spend an hour doing an adjustment on that hip and then you can put it back out with a thought, one unkind thought to yourself, you're going to put it right back out again.
Wow.
Right? And then you've got to learn to keep yourself in integrity. That's how we stay healthy. Nobody can do that for you. I can't stop you from generating unhealthy patterns. You're the only one who can do that. I can adjust you. You can feel what it feels like to be neutral. But going forward, we can do a bunch of adjustments. You can get better. But ultimately, you have to check and balance and discipline your own mind.
This just reaffirms that you're responsible for your own healing.
You are responsible for your own healing. People can help you, but at the end of the day, it's your body, it's your mind, and you're responsible for it. And if you're not in charge, who is, right? I mean, that was for me when I was bulimic. I'm like, who's in charge here? What's going on? And, it takes some work to create that alignment, to create that interconnection. But really, it's the choices that we make, the discipline that we exert, and how much we believe in ourselves and do you feel worthy? Because a lot of what stops us from making the best decisions for ourselves, and this is really true, like pretty much for everybody, Alec, and this was surprising to me because it took a while to realize that at the kernel of every dysfunction that I was working with in anybody, there was a belief that they weren't worthy.
Wow.
Right. And if you don't believe you're worthy of your gifts or your greatness or your success or whatever, you're going to block, you're going to tense up around that. And you're not going to let life force into that area. And they're like, no, can't go there, not worthy. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of goes all back to the story of original sin that we've been told.
Yeah.
That somehow this mind virus has been implanted in all of us, that we're guilty sinners. And we've fallen from grace and that we're not worthy.
Which then immediately upon being born in this reality, you're put into a state of shame.
That's right. From the moment you're born.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a really tough box to work out of.
Yeah. Have you read Wetiko, by the way, the mind virus that's plaguing humanity by Paul Levy?
I haven't read the whole book, but I've read segments of it, and I've certainly read articles by Paul Levy, and that does play a role, because wherever we come out sideways, if you will, whether it's for just fighting, for example. Let's say what is it? So there's a Bob Marley line I was listening to the other day. If you fuss and fighting all day, you're saying prayers to the devil, I say,
Mm,
right? And
mm,
that's so you're creating loosh, right? You're creating all of this chi and all of this energy that's here that then becomes food for etheric parasites. And
yeah.
etheric parasites will sort of be like, oh, these are feeding stations. So they're able to like kind of goad you into like more of that kind of behavior.
Mm.
And then you just not only are you stuck inside yourself, but now you have a hitchhiker that's feeding on that
Where you
imbalance.
almost become addicted to it. And that's where like people will become addicted to drama, to chaos, and to traumatic experiences and perpetuate them.
Yeah, and it's a real addiction. I think most of us are addicted to struggle or drama in some way
Mm.
without even really being aware that we are. I think most of us grew up in homes where there was strife and drama and fighting going on, and that human family dysfunction just kind of keeps on going down the line, and we end
Mm.
up perpetuating these patterns and creating food for parasites. And the trick is that if you are in complete alignment and integrity, you don't create food
Mm.
or for stuff that you don't want around. In order, if we want to become free of the parasite class, if we want to become free of energetic parasites, we have to walk ourselves into the straight and narrow path of being in deep integrity and speaking the truth and living to our truth and staying in alignment as individuals, which will then inform our collective experience.
Sounds like authenticity is one of the most important things then, right?
Yeah, but it's something we often feel guilty or ashamed of who we really are because of how we grew up in school. And, there's only one right answer and everybody has to kind of fall in line and
Yeah.
the Madison Avenue. And there's been so many things that have diminished us and made us feel unworthy of being authentic.
The reason I brought that up too specifically is because the last episode that I just recorded, I interviewed a guy that his name's Vinny Tolman, and he had not even a near death experience. He had what's called an after death experience. He was literally zipped up in a body bag, no pulse, no breath, body already going into rigor mortis. And when he ventured into the afterlife, and then of course was subsequently revived to tell his story. When he ventured into the afterlife, though, he met his guide, and his guide gave him 10 principles to live a fulfilled life on earth. And the first principle, the most important one, was authenticity. And it's been so fascinating to me because that's been my message to those people who resonate with what I have to say, is being authentic is how we get out of this mess. So
Yeah. Right. And it seems like it should be so easy. People are always saying to me, Eileen, you're so direct, you're such a straight shooter. Like, I don't know how to be any other way.
you are,
That's
though. I freaking love that about you too, especially when we hung out at Music and Sky. It was like so refreshing to be around you, because I sort of had this perception that you know, you're someone I look up to. So it was cool to just hang out with you, and you're such a down to earth person. It was so awesome.
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just a human, right?
Yes.
Being real because it takes energy to be unreal. It
Mm,
takes energy to come from your defenses, from your falsehoods, from your insecurities. Like that all takes a lot of energy. Whereas just coming from the core of who you're being, if that's where you're seated, it's easy to do that.
mm,
It's just the path of least resistance, really.
mhm. Okay, I want to be respectful of your time, so I want to get back to two or three more questions related to biofield anatomy and the human biofield, specifically with um, the phenomenon of contagion. Two or more people getting sick in the same space with similar symptoms, especially past the germ theory paradigm. We're done with that. We've moved away from that. Anyone who listens to this show knows that already about me and all the guests that I have on. So, what are your thoughts on that phenomenon? Obviously, most of it can be chalked up to similar eating habits, similar emotional trauma, similar exposure to non-native EMFs, which I would like to get into as well, their effects on our field. But what are your thoughts on the phenomenon of contagion, or two or more people getting sick in the same space?
Well, if you yawn, you might make me yawn,
Mhm.
but you didn't get anything on me, or at least I hope
Yeah.
you didn't,
Yeah.
right? If you throw up, I might throw up, especially if you throw up
Yeah.
violently and disgustingly, I might be like, right? And in that case, I really hope you didn't get anything on me either.
Mhm.
Um, so what is that? That's vibrational information.
Mhm.
Right? I'm glad you asked me this because I've been trying to, as a bothist and someone who, believes that both is very often the answer. We've been so conditioned into either or thinking that
Mhm.
bothism doesn't occur to most people. But how can you reconcile this idea of germ theory with the idea of terrain theory?
Mhm.
And from a vibrational standpoint, well, you just need to like swap out the little beasties for like a little information packet,
Yeah.
basically. It's just a little
Not even
vibrational
physical.
information.
It's literally like an energetic information packet, right?
Yeah, it's like an information packet. So if all of a sudden, your body is getting the signal, like, I don't know, like, when you decide it's time to deep clean your oven, right?
Yes.
You shut it and then you lock it, and it gets really hot and it
Yeah.
like cleans, right? So I think that flus and they're all part of the detox process, really. Like in biofield tuning, sometimes after a session, people can get flu-like symptoms, might get a fever, they might produce a lot of mucus, they
I
might
have
have.
been for the past 2 days since our session. I feel you probably hear me, I sound kind of stuffed up right now,
Yeah,
so
you got mucus. Like when I
yeah.
first started getting tuned by my very first students back in 2010, I had so much lockdown, so much stagnation. I was so compartmentalized and locked down. And as it started moving, mucus started coming out. I spent a month. I lost 7 pounds in a month of mucus.
Oh my god.
I was like, "What the heck?" It was just all right, cell poop or whatever, just stuff
Yeah.
that garbage trucks hadn't been getting to that area, and now all of a sudden they are. Is that a bad thing? Did I go out and buy Mucinex and like try to stop it?
No.
No, right? I understood that it was my body taking out the trash. So,
Yeah.
if somebody near me, their inner oven has gone into a deep cleaning cycle, and my body's like, hey, we could probably use that too. We've got a bunch of waste kicking around. I'm kind of tired and could use a rest and a clean out. Then that might trigger my body to go into that. But if I'm well rested and I'm pretty clean, I might be able to be exposed to that vibrational information, and it's not going to trigger that response
Going
in.
back to what we talked about earlier, because you are a centered, balanced channel that has a very, very, very strong field, so you're not gonna be impacted by that.
Right. I don't necessarily need to take the time to
Yeah.
rest and to clean out because I'm good. So uh this whole sort of like demonization of the body's natural clean out
Yeah.
process is really strange to
Yeah.
me that we would like live in fear. I mean, obviously, if you're old and you have all of these things, sometimes that cleaning cycle might take you out altogether.
Mhm.
It can happen, but when you're
Yeah.
ready to go, something's going to take you down. um but ordinary like colds and flu, they're just part of being healthy. and it
Yep.
is your body. So yeah, I don't think there's any teeny weeny boogeymen. But I do think that there's resonant packets
Yep.
of information, just like the yawn, that can get passed
Yeah.
along.
Or
Yeah.
women syncing up on their menstrual cycles when they're around each
Same
other
thing,
first and
right?
third.
No substances are going back and forth.
No.
It's information, it's rhythm, it's movement, and we get informed by that. We get entrained by it.
Someone in the comments just said, "I'm here. Let's see if I can pull it up. I'm learning a lot with a few aha moments. Thank you, Eileen." And it's funny because I was just thinking the same thing. I'm like, this is tying together some things for me. Again, going back to my understanding that germ theory is completely false, but also there's some mechanism to contagion, but it's our belief about symptoms being bad that perpetuates them, and we try to suppress them, which prolongs our suffering. And it's just so fascinating tying all these together. Now I want to get into non-native EMFs and the what you have encountered in terms of your research or your understanding of the human biofield, and how prolonged or uh, lots of exposure to non-native EMFs have an impact on our biofield.
Well, remember, this is all vibrational signaling,
Mhm.
and it's subtle. And our body is communicating through light, through electricity, not chemistry like we've been told. I mean, obviously there is a chemical element, but the chemicals are formed as a consequence of the movement of the electricity. So chemistry is secondary to the movement of current through us. Uh, if you have a strong field, if you have a strong central channel, then you will have a strong outer boundary. And within your own clear, coherent signal and strong boundary, you will maintain your own electromagnetic integrity, right? So
Mm.
that's the trick to navigating the environment. If your battery gets too low, like one of the things I always ask people is, if you had a battery meter that between 1 and 100, where's your battery meter at right now? Okay. Now, if you're coming in, and everybody, think what number comes to mind. If you're coming in at something like a 50 or a 60, you're going to be bothered by these things. You don't
Mm.
have enough voltage. You don't have enough signal strength. These things are going to have a negative impact on you. They're going to give you brain fog. Kind of ironically, cell phone signals interrupt cell to cell communication in our own bodies. Well, they're kind of funny,
Yeah, that is.
right? Uh, so, exposure, it has to do with duration, with proximity, with intensity. Like, I can handle my Wi-Fi router, but if my phone has accidentally turned the Bluetooth on, like, I'm bothered by Bluetooth more than anything
Wow.
else, which is, I find really interesting.
That
Like,
is
I
very
can tell, and
interesting.
my field starts doing this torque thing. I'm like, is my Bluetooth turned on? Like,
Wow. So you've literally been like, you've started to feel it
I
subtly, and
feel
then wow, that is so
I
cool.
feel it.
Or
Yeah.
have you ever been in a situation where you're like, you ask someone else, like, is your Bluetooth on your phone by any chance? Or do you have
No,
a Bluetooth?
no, I haven't, but it's good to know, right? That certain things and that's just me. I don't know if other people are bothered by Bluetooth. I know that things like Apple Watches or Fitbits. I gave a session to somebody who was wearing a Fitbit, and she took it off. I was like, okay, you need to take that off. Now, I've never even held one, and she took it off, and there was a green light underneath that was like strobing and flashing. I was like, what the heck? You're putting that on your body's electrical
Yeah,
system?
yeah.
You've got all of these meridians that flow through here, and you want a fucking electrical signal doing this right there? I was like, that is a really bad idea. And I
Yeah,
put it on the counter, but then I was like, I need to put this in the closet. Like, I
yeah.
just get this thing
Get it
away
away from me. Yeah,
Get
ew,
it away
gross.
from me.
Yeah.
It's sort of ironic, you think, oh, Fitbit for health. No, it's very bad for your electrical system. Same with earbuds. I won't
Mhm,
wear wireless earbuds. You can pay me to wear
mhm.
wireless earbuds, right? So there's certain poisons that I don't pick.
I've
And
gotta
those
give a
are
shameless
like,
plug real quick too, because these
mhm.
ones I'm wearing, they're made by Defender Shield, and the earbud is actually down here, and there's this plastic tube that it travels up to your ear, so you're not
Oh, wow.
actually getting the radiation to your head.
Wow, that's good. See, that sort of thing, I would pick something like that. I think that's sensible. I don't think we can, there's certain we have to figure out what can we live with and what can't we live
Mhm,
with, and start to make your environment to the best of your ability work for you. But the whole trick to navigating this increasingly saturated and potentially toxic electromagnetic environment is to get your battery meter up, is to raise your own voltage by taking care of your own electric health. And the number one way I think to that, I write about this in my book, Electric Body, Electric Health, is to stop adding resistance to your electrical flow
mhm,
through patterns of tension,
mm.
right? Anytime you find yourself going into this, whatever that looks like, I got to write a big check. I got to deal with this person. I got to just start to observe when you expand and when you contract. I'm going to hold in this emotion, or am I going to express this emotion? I'm going to hold in how I really feel with this person who just keeps trespassing my boundaries, or I'm going to really communicate my boundaries diplomatically and effectively, right?
Mm.
So we want to keep ourselves in a flow state, because it's the restriction that causes inflammation in the body, which then, goes into a whole series of imbalances from there.
God, this conversation has been so freaking fascinating for me. I wish we could go like another hour and a half, but I guess I have one more question. How has your understanding of the human biofield and biofield anatomy impacted your relationship to the divine, to God, to the universe, or whatever you call it? How has that brought you into a deeper spiritual understanding of life?
I was raised in a prep school in a non-religious home, completely non-religious home.
Mm.
My father used to tell people that we were pagans. You just joke around. And my dad was a Protestant from New York City, and my mom was Catholic from Northern Ireland. They tried baptizing us, my older siblings, and they just gave up. They were like, nah, nonsense. So no, I was raised in, Jesus Christ was a swear word in my house. And that was it.
Mm.
And then I went to a prep school education, which really the whole like atheism thing was very much put into my head. And, as a teenager, I was like, I don't believe in God kind
Like
of
a
thing.
rebellious thing that a lot of teenagers do, I feel like.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
then, I don't know what changed. I mean, again, when I was 18, I started being like curious about spirituality and really went on a great mission to read about all different kinds of religions and seek to understand religion and, my own place within that. When I was 20, I did a course in miracles.
Mm.
Which is 365 lessons a day,
Yeah.
and that was super helpful to me, but it was all written in Christian language that I kind of,
Mm.
as somebody who associated with New Age,
Yeah.
kind of had to translate it all out of Christian stuff. But I would say, just to kind of like summarize this the best way I can, I was a seeker for a long time, trying to understand life, and I like looking for some kind of light that I didn't even know what I was looking for. And I read so many books on self-help and took so many courses, but I was still like, there's something missing, there's something missing. And then I came across plasma, the fourth state of matter,
Mm.
which I didn't learn about in school. I learned about solid, liquid, and gas. I
Mhm.
never learned about plasma. What is plasma? Plasma is the flow of electric charge. Like the sun is a plasma. The northern lights are increase in voltage in the upper atmosphere, which turns the gases, the plasma that's up there, from dark current mode to glow mode, like turning
Mhm.
on a neon light.
Mhm.
Plasma is really everywhere. We have our body, our biofield is a bioplasma.
Mm.
And I realized that that was the light that I was seeking because it's connective, right? The same light in the sun and the stars and the light in your eyes and the light in my eyes and the light in, right, is all the same light.
Mm.
And so discovering plasma allowed me to reconcile this sort of spiritual notion of all is one with this sort of scientific that, like all is not one, like what's missing here. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is what bridges science and spirituality. Like my electric body is my soul,
Mhm.
right? When I die, it goes out. My light goes out. And it goes out with all of my memories in it.
Mhm.
And so that to me, when I found plasma and then ether, which is something that I talk about, and these connective, illuminated aspects, really like made me feel connected to all of creation.
Wow.
So that was a big part of it. But the deeper I've gone into it, it's interesting you use the word God, Alec, because I think that, a lot of us have gone through the new age nonsense, which I don't
Yes.
ascribe to anymore. But like when we don't say God, they're like, oh, we say source or the universe. Like
Yeah.
God has become like
Yeah,
some kind
like
of
I like saying God, but then I say source or universe for other people because, like, to me, it really is all the same thing. But I say
yeah.
God now. I say God.
Well, I say God, but let's just say God. Like say God,
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
right? And then say the universe
Mhm.
or source, God. Right?
Yeah.
It's much more satisfying word to say.
More powerful. It carries more power to it. It
It
does.
does carry more power. And so it was funny because I was having this conversation last night with my two sons who are 22 and 25 and my son's boyfriend. We were talking about God and like, what does it mean? Like, because my older sister comes very much still from that atheist perspective. And she's like, oh, I don't believe in God. I'm like, well, what is God? Her perception
Mm.
is like the sort of religious male
Bearded white
figure,
dude in the sky sitting on a
yeah, in the
throne.
sky. I'm like, I don't really believe in that either. But so what is God if God isn't that? I said in this conversation that God is all of creation. I was like, this is God.
Yeah.
This is God. Like everything you see is God. All the explicit reality and the implicate reality, the creator and the created, the
Mhm.
sound waves traveling through time and time itself, and the container that the sound waves travel through. Like it's all God. It's the essential oneness of life itself.
Mhm.
That's gone. Just like, I want every cell in my pancreas to be conscious of the fact that it's part of a whole unit. And I want
Mhm.
my whole body to work together. So God being the oneness of life that wants to be in a state of flow and that wants to be healthy, right? Of course,
Mhm.
there would be a force in nature that guides us to health, that guides us to flow, that shows up as our conscience, if you will, that nudge, that energy of like, this is the way to go. This is where flow is. This is how life wants to direct you. So what is God but that intelligence that informs us to be healthy, to be righteous, to do the right thing?
Mhm.
And it's everything. Yeah.
Ah, that was
So
such a cool answer.
yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. This has been incredible, Eileen. Thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we close out?
Well, we got a couple things, right? I'm going to be doing a group tuning for your people,
Yeah,
right?
for my membership on January 5th, we'll be doing a group biofield tuning session with Eileen, which I'm super stoked for, especially having just done a tune up myself and experiencing that. I'm so excited for our members to experience that as well.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. We also have recently added biofield tuning classes. You can become a certified biofield tuning practitioner. We have beautiful, really comprehensive online training programs. You can do it from the comfort of your own home. And we're going to start back up with in-person classes later next year. But if you're psyched about this right now, go to biofieldtuning.com and see, if the classes that are available fit in your time and budget. That's there. If you want to receive a session, I have a few slots here and there where I see clients. I didn't for years because I was too busy teaching and
Mhm.
just kind of, we sell tuning forks and like write books, and there's a lot to do, and so I stopped. But recently, have started seeing a few people here and there. But also at biofieldtuning.com, we have a practitioner directory listing. There's hundreds of practitioners all over the world that people can see. And if you want to experience, if you don't want to maybe spend that much money, but you want to have an experience of it, I've also made a lot of recordings of tuning sessions, which you were like, how does that even work? But you know what, Alec, like you can listen to a recording of a song and be moved by it, right? Because sound
Mhm.
moves us. So you can listen to a recording that I made 3 years ago and still be moved by it, you know?
I have one more question. I just remembered this actually.
Yeah.
Before I forget, how were you able to tune into my biofield through Zoom? Because
Yeah,
we did
it's
this
kind of
session on
wild,
Zoom.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. People asked me for years if I could do this work at a distance. And I
Yeah.
was always like, no. Like, what a dumb
Yeah.
question. This is sound waves on the body, people, right? No way I'm doing this at a distance. And I was really actually very arrogant about it. Uh, but then I had a mentor ask me if I would be willing to try one on him. And he was a MD in California, and I was in Vermont. And, I am a researcher. I am curious. And I was like, okay, I'm willing to give it a try. But I didn't really believe it was going to be possible. Right. So I went into this very skeptical. So we connected via intention. We didn't have an open line of communication. He lay down on his table in California, and I went up to my empty table in Vermont and just pretended that he was there. And I started to comb through his field. And Alec, much to my amazement, all of the same patterns of information, like his
Oh
field
my
showed up.
god.
And I was able to read it. And then I got to this one point in biofield tuning, it's a combination of working in the field with unweighted forks and then going and working on the body with weighted forks. Because sometimes if
Uh-huh.
you get stuck in the field, if you go to the body and you do a little work on the body with a weighted forks, it opens up space. You go back to the field and then you can move through. And so I reached one of those junctures where I'm like, well, this is where I go to the body. I was like, but there's no body there. But then I was like, but there's no body here. So
Yeah.
I took my weighted forks and I went over and I'm like kind of pretending there's a body there, just kind of, poking him in space, feeling kind of peculiar about it. But then I went back and just like an in-person session, like it had moved. So astonishing. So I took notes. I
Wow.
wrote down all these things. I went through his whole field and I was like, your mother is this personality. And, you had a head injury when you were 5 and this organ's this and you have arthritis here, like all the things. Right. And then we got on the phone and I went through my notes and he was like, Eileen, that is all exactly right. And I
It
felt
was for me too the other day on Zoom. I was like, this is incredible. And it was stuck in my mind the whole time. Like, how is she able to do this through Zoom? It was incredible.
because of the ether, because the
Yeah.
ether, another kind of element that we don't learn about, contains everything. It contains all, just like
Mhm.
water, right? It's all in water. It's been the same water since the creation, and
Mhm.
water is a record keeper. The Akashic record, the ether,
Yeah.
it's all the same thing. All that information is there. And so with the magic of my human mind, my intention, I can be like, right here, this is Alex's field of information. It's like pulling a book from the library,
Mhm.
You're clicking on a file. Like you and I are like working on a Google Drive doc together. We're both accessing it from where we are. And it shows up and it's really wild. And when I work with groups, I'm like, okay, this is my intention. Our minds are so powerful. They don't want us to know like
Mm,
just how powerful we are.
mm.
Um, I'm like this right here. And when I strike the fork, I'm reading the information, the data set of everyone who's listening live, everyone who will ever listen to the recording. I'll like make one data set right here and I'm going to read it and I'm going to work with it. And it works. And it works
Wow.
consistently, like over and it's worked for thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of times. And it's just something's going on, right?
Well, how silly of us too, and like this is what just came up for me. How silly of us to think like we know that cell phone technology like is emitting a frequency somewhere, then it's emitting a frequency down to that phone. We're sure that it works. I mean, it does. And then we second guess our abilities and the technology of our bodies created by the divine. Like that's so absurd.
I know. I know. We're antennas. We're antennas that are both receiving and transmitting information, and we can tune into each other's signal, and we do. Like I'm sure you've had the experience with your wife. You might be on the road or something, and all of a sudden you
Oh
think of
God.
her, and you go grab your phone, and she's just messaged you, or she just
Yes.
messages you as you grab it. Right? It's
Yeah.
the same phenomena.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, okay, we could go on forever, but we're already an hour and a half in. So this was awesome, Eileen. Thank you so much. And for more on Eileen, please visit biofieldtuning.com. Thank you so much, Eileen. This
You
is
bet, Alex.
awesome.
Pleasure. I'll see you in January.
Yep.